The wind howled like a wounded animal across the Morrison ranch, carrying with it the bitter cold of a Montana winter that showed no mercy. Jake Morrison stood on his porch, his weathered hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, staring into the white abyss that had swallowed his land. 3 years had passed since Sarah's funeral. 3 years since cancer had stolen the only woman he'd ever loved, and still, the silence of this old house cut deeper than any winter wind ever could. At 52, Jake had resigned himself to a life of solitude, his only companions the cattle that depended on him and the ghosts of memories that haunted every corner of the ranch. His grown children called occasionally from their lives in Denver and Seattle, their voices filled with concern he didn't want and pity he couldn't stomach. They'd begged him to sell the ranch, to move somewhere warmer, somewhere less lonely. But this land held Sarah's laughter in every fence post, her smile in every sunset, and Jake would rather freeze to death than abandon the only place she'd ever called home. The blizzard had started 2 days ago, and the weather reports said it wouldn't let up for another 48 hours. Jake had checked on the cattle that morning, making sure they had access to the heated barn and enough feed to last through the storm. Now, as darkness crept across the snow-covered fields, he was about to head inside when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost dismissed it as the wind, playing tricks. But there it was again, a cry weak and desperate, coming from somewhere beyond the fence line near the main road. Jake's heart seized. Every instinct told him he was imagining things, that grief and isolation were finally catching up with him. But then he heard it a third time, unmistakable now, the sound of someone in distress. Without thinking, he grabbed his heavy coat, pulled on his boots, and stepped into the blinding snow. The cold hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath, but he pushed forward, following that desperate sound through drifts that came up to his knees. What he found made his blood run colder than the freezing air around him. There, partially buried in a snowbank just off the road, was a car, a small sedan that had clearly slid off the icy highway. The driver's door hung open, and in the snow beside it, curled into a ball and barely moving, was a young woman. She couldn't have been more than 25, her lips blue, her body shaking violently with hypothermia. But that wasn't what made Jake's world tilt on its axis. Clutched against her chest, wrapped in what looked like every piece of clothing she could spare, was a baby. The infant was crying, that weak sound that had drawn Jake out into the storm, and in that moment, something inside him that had been dead for 3 years roared back to life. He dropped to his knees beside them, his rancher's hands that had delivered countless calves and mended broken fences, now shaking as they reached for this fragile mother and child. "I've got you," he growled, his voice rough from disuse and emotion. "I've got you both." The young woman's eyes fluttered open, glassy and unfocused. Her lips moved, trying to form words, but no sound came out except a rattling wheeze. Jake didn't waste time with questions. He scooped the baby from her arms, so light, so terrifyingly small, and tucked the infant inside his coat against his chest. Then, with strength born of desperation and purpose, he lifted the young woman into his arms. She was barely conscious, her head lolling against his shoulder, but she was alive. They were both alive, and Jake was damned if he was going to let this storm take them. The journey back to the house felt like miles, though it was barely 300 yards. Every step was a battle, against wind that tried to knock him down and snow that grabbed at his boots like frozen hands. But Jake Morrison hadn't survived 52 Montana winters, hadn't built a ranch from nothing, hadn't endured the loss of his soulmate only to fail now. He pushed through, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his muscles screaming, until finally, blessedly, the porch lights of his house emerged from the white chaos. He kicked the door open and stumbled inside, immediately hit by the warmth of the wood stove he'd stoked before heading out. He laid the young woman on the couch, then carefully extracted the baby from his coat. The infant was still crying, which Jake knew was a good sign. Silence would have been far worse. He grabbed blankets from the linen closet, the ones Sarah had quilted during her last good year, and began the careful process of warming them both. The young woman's breathing was shallow, her skin like ice, and Jake knew she was in serious trouble. He called 911, but the dispatcher's words confirmed what he already knew. No ambulance could make it. Through the blizzard, he was on his own. For the next 6 hours, Jake Morrison fought death with everything he had. He removed the woman's wet clothes and wrapped her in warm, dry blankets. He fed the baby formula he found in a half-frozen diaper bag from the car, his clumsy rancher's hands somehow remembering the gentle touch required from when his own children were small. He monitored the woman's vital signs, talking to her constantly, telling her she had to fight, that her baby needed her, that she couldn't give up now. And somewhere in those desperate hours, as snow piled against the windows and the world outside became a frozen wasteland, Jake felt something he thought had died with Sarah. He felt needed. He felt alive. He felt like maybe, just maybe, God hadn't forgotten about him after all. When Emma Chen finally opened her eyes, she saw a weathered cowboy with storm-gray eyes standing over her. Panic seized her until she spotted her baby, Lily, sleeping peacefully in a makeshift bassinet fashioned from a drawer. "You saved us," she whispered through tears of relief and gratitude. Jake Morrison shook his head firmly. "You saved her. You kept that baby alive in conditions that would have killed most people. I just provided the warm place to bring you back." Over the next 3 snowbound days, as the blizzard raged outside and cut them off from civilization, Emma's story emerged in painful fragments. She'd been fleeing from her husband, Marcus, a wealthy Silicon Valley tech executive who had seemed perfect during their whirlwind courtship. But after Lily was born, his true nature had emerged like a monster removing its mask. The control started subtly, questioning where she went, checking her phone, isolating her from friends and family. Then came complete isolation in their gated community home. He took over all finances, monitored her every move with GPS trackers, and slowly destroyed her sense of self-worth. And finally came the violence, unpredictable and terrifying. Shoves grabbed wrists leaving bruises, holes punched in walls next to her head, and always the threats that he'd take Lily away forever. Have Emma committed to a psychiatric facility, that his lawyers and judge friends would ensure she lost everything. Emma had endured it for 3 years, believing she had no choice, until the night Marcus grabbed 6-month-old Lily during a rage. The look in his eyes, the way he held their baby like an object he might throw, shattered Emma's paralysis. That night, while he slept off his whiskey-fueled anger, she'd executed her secret plan. With $300 saved over 2 years, her hidden phone, and evidence she'd been collecting, videos of his abuse, proof of his embezzlement and affair, she'd fled. Her destination was her grandmother's house in Fargo, the only family member Marcus didn't know existed. But she'd underestimated Montana's winter. Her car had crashed on black ice, and she'd crawled into the blizzard with Lily, praying someone would find them before they froze to death. Jake had been that someone. "You're safe here," Jake promised. "Both of you, for as long as you need." But Emma knew Marcus would never stop looking. Over the following weeks, as winter loosened its grip, an unlikely family formed. Jake taught Emma ranch work, feeding calves, mending fences, finding strength in physical labor. Emma brought laughter back to rooms silent for 3 years since Sarah's death. Little Lily filled the house with coos and giggles that healed Jake's grieving soul. But peace couldn't last. 2 months later, a black Mercedes pulled up the driveway. Marcus stepped out in his expensive suit, flanked by a lawyer and security guard. "I'm here for my wife and daughter," Marcus announced with cold confidence. "I have lawyers. Judges and doctors who will testify Emma is mentally unstable. She kidnapped my child. Bring them out now, or I'll have you arrested for harboring a fugitive. Your ranch will be seized. You'll die in prison." Jake stared at this man who wielded money and power like weapons, who'd never faced real consequences. Then Jake smiled, a wolf smile. He pulled out his phone and pressed play. Marcus's face appeared on screen, captured months ago during one of his rages. The audio was crystal clear. Threats, violence, abuse laid bare. "Emma's been recording you for 6 months, Jake said quietly. "Every threat, every time you hurt her. She's also got bank records showing the $4 million you've been embezzling. Text messages to your mistress, proof of securities fraud, and sworn testimony from witnesses to your abuse." Jake stepped forward, suddenly seeming more dangerous than the younger man had anticipated. "Here's what's happening. You're driving back to California and filing for divorce. You'll give Emma full custody with no visitation rights. You'll provide a $5 million settlement, and you'll stay away from her and that baby forever. Or all this evidence goes to the FBI, SEC, and every media outlet I can find." Marcus's face went purple with rage. "You can't open it now." Jake's voice dropped to a growl that carried the weight of protective fury. "Open your eyes to the truth. You've already lost. The only question is whether you lose quietly or lose everything. Your company, your reputation, your freedom. The standoff lasted 30 seconds. Then Marcus got in his car and drove away. He never came back. 3 days later, his lawyer returned alone with divorce papers giving Emma everything Jake had demanded. 6 months later, on a clear Montana morning, Jake stood on his porch with Emma, watching Lily take her first wobbly steps. "Thank you," Emma said softly. "For everything." Jake shook his head, catching Lily as she reached him. "You saved me just as much as I saved you. This house needed laughter again. I needed purpose." Emma smiled, the bright smile of someone who'd found their way from darkness to light. "So what now?" Jake looked at the cattle grazing, the mountains against the endless sky, at this woman and child who'd become his family. "Now we live, we ranch. We raise this girl to be strong and kind. We prove that the worst storms sometimes bring the greatest blessings." As Lily squealed with delight and Emma laughed, Jake knew Sarah would have loved them both. The ranch that had been a monument to grief became a sanctuary of hope. And Jake Morrison, the widowed cowboy who'd thought his story was over, discovered it was really just beginning.